Elegy Written in a Country Churchyard by Thomas Gray. The summary written by Ohidur. It is likely that the poet Thomas Gray began to write his best poem, Elegy Written in a Country Churchyard, in 1746. In fact, this poem was somewhat shorter than the published version in 1751. Some persons have presumed that it was written because of his friend Richard West, who died in 1742. Here Gray focused on human mortality and at times reflected specifically on the death of a single person. Several other popular poems were in the setting of graveyards and pointed out deaths. The poem is in 4-line stanzas or quatrains where the first line rhymes with the third and the second with the, and this abab pattern was associated with elegiac poetry. Moreover, the last 3 stanzas are printed in italic type with the title, the Epitaph, in the first 3 stanzas. The poet sets the scene for his private and in quiet meditations. The scene is serene and beautiful, but life there is not jolly. Gray reflects that this day will also die it did yesterday when the ploughman comes back home tiredly. On the other hand, the poet is alone but not tired at all. The lines in the poem hint a sense of the energy of his loneliness and of the quietness of the scene. For example, the tinkling of the cattle who have returned home, the drone of the beetle, and the sound of an owl from the church tower. These descriptions create the backdrop for the poet's melancholic reflections about some eternal truths. In the next 4 stanzas, Gray uses the churchyard scene to invoke important images. For example, the strength of the elms, death as symbolized by the graves, and the comfort provided by the yews shading bodies that sleep. He starts pondering over the death for the humble and lower class, and it indicates a break of simple pleasures in life. The poet reflects not on the untimely death of young people but on the death that comes after a normal lifespan. In the next 4 stanzas, he talks about the upper classes, those with ambition, grandeur, power, nobility, and pride, and urges them not to mock the poor for their simplicity or for not having ornate statues on the graveyard monuments. He points his fingers to the living upper classes, likely to those among his readers, that it should not be their glory that they have achieved or the elaborate tombstone they will have after death. In real sense they are as simple and ordinary as the poor in the graves. In 8 stanzas next, the pivotal message lies. The poor are born with the same natural abilities as members of the upper classes. Gray infers that the innocence and beauty of these souls have been wasted in their isolated rustic environment. His famous lines are the following 4, which are enough to make him one of the most influential poets. Full many a gem of purest ray serene, the dark unfathomed caves of ocean bare. Full many a flower is born to blush, unseen, and waste its sweetness on the desert air. The churchyard graves may also contain the remains of a person who had the ability to become a great scholar, a generous national leader, or a man who could have been a great poet but is in the end no more than a mute inglorious Milton. However, the poet goes on to speculate that poverty may have prevented some dead men from doing not good but evil. Now death has made them, unlike Oliver Cromwell, guiltless of shedding blood they have not been able to slaughter, to refuse mercy, to lie, or to wallow in luxury and pride. Far from the ignoble strife of the great world, the villagers have led sober and noiseless lives. Gray indicates even though the rustic deaths have accomplished nothing in the world, still they may be morally superior to their social superiors. Next section, lines 77 to 92. He remarks on the graves' simple markers with their badly spelled inscriptions, names and dates. Some have rudimentary verses or consoling biblical texts, some are decorated with shapeless sculpture. The poet feels that such grave markers imply the humanity these dead people share with all men and women. He supposes the voice of general human nature can be heard crying from these graves. In the last line of this section, Gray reflects what he has learned will apply to himself and his readers as well. The wanted fires of his life and those of his readers will continue to burn in the ashes of all graves. Gray is addressing himself when he writes, for thee, who mindful of the unhonored dead dost in these lines their artless tale relate, if chance, by lonely contemplation led, some kindred spirit shall inquire thy fate. He replies to the question, and Gray imagines an old farmer who has been described as a hoary-headed swain. The farmer's story identifies the poet as a man who is neither a poor man nor a man of noble achievement. He is a wanderer, a man who heartily meets the sun at dawn, yet later lies by a favorite tree and gazes listlessly at a brook. He murmurs his fancies, resembling a madman or a hopeless lover. Actually, Gray is everything that his contemporaries thought a poet should be, a man of exquisite sensibility, unfit for the world's work, meditative and sad. The farmer recounts that he saw the poet's funeral procession to a church, presumably the one where the poem is set. In the epitaph, Gray implies his own grave being upon the lap of earth, and not inside the church. He accords himself modest praise and justifies his life as worthwhile. Despite his humble birth, he was well educated. Gray defines himself in line 124 as generous and sincere, for which his reward was not worldly fame or fortune, the paths of glory, but heavenly recompense, undoubtedly. The epitaph concludes by telling the reader not to ask more about the poet's virtues and frailties but to leave him to God. Interestingly, the poem, Elegy Written in a Country Churchyard, moves from a meditation in a particular place, upon the graves of the poor, to a reflection on the mortality of all humankind and on some of the benefits of being controlled by poverty. The poem suggests to all people not to die with a wish to be remembered similarly after death. He finishes the poem by imagining his own death and how he hopes to be remembered.